So of course guys, with the F-106 coming up as the next event vehicle, we gotta ask ourselves again, what are the other interceptors that we actually might see it in the game? I already did some videos on this matter, but I really wanted to take a realistic look on stuff that actually might have a place. What does that mean? Well, the first thing is that, of course, it's not any interceptor that can be added. Why is that? Because not any interceptor has a cannon, right? And normally, depending on situation, that's a major rule for them, okay? Because a gun, of course, makes it up to be a lot more competitive in a normal combat scenario, right? But even without a cannon, what are realistic, vehicles that could be added as event vehicles or even in the tech tree, but that have a place in the game maybe, just like the F-106 has, okay? So we're gonna do a list. Think about this. Realistic stuff, guys. I'm not talking about prototypes. I'm not talking about versions that don't have a gun. We're gonna have some, honorable mentions at the end of the video. But overall, things that can be competitive enough to be added, okay? So realistic stuff. And let me know in the comments if I missed any of them. So we start off with a vehicle that we've talked about not that long ago, actually, during last week, if I'm not mistaken. The F-89J, right? The F-89J, or during this week, actually. But yeah, the F-89J Scorpion would be pretty much the same as the normal Scorpions that we have, but the main thing here is that it has the ability to carry the AIM-4 Falcon missile. So it has a proper radar, basically, because the radar that the older ones have, they are a little bit more limited, right? And with this radar, you can actually guide the semi-active radar homing versions of the Falcon. Normally, this thing doesn't have a gun. I couldn't confirm if there was a prototype or something that had a gun, but normally you wouldn't have a gun, okay? So just AIM-4s, basically, and the FFAR rockets and stuff. Maybe a nuclear rocket in the future. No, I doubt it, because it's like 1.5 kilotons of TNT, so probably never gonna see the Genie here, but at the end of the day, it would be pretty much just like the F-106, so in the terms of missiles. So if it has a good enough missile, it won't need a gun, but it isn't going to be as competitive as some others, right? But it can be added. Even without a gun, this is one of the examples that even without one, it can actually be competitive because of the AIM-4. Another one for the Americans would be the F-94A Starfire. So if we had the A model, it would actually have 450 cows. It's not the best thing ever, but it's still doable, right? Doesn't have any guided missiles or anything like that, just rockets, so it would feel like a normal fighter. Even looks like something like an F-80 or something like that, right? So that would be kind of the idea, but faster maybe, with a radar, a basic radar, basically, right? More of an aiming radar, I would assume. But yeah, the F-94 is kind of the evolution, pretty much, of the F-80, right? So at the end of the day, it is a pretty iconic aircraft, and it is an interceptor, right? With the 450 cows, it can actually do some damage, but the performance would be around the same, but maybe a little bit better than the F-80, right? So very low BR, but still cool enough to actually be added. Then we need to talk about the Voodoos, guys. These are very iconic vehicles for both the US and Canada. The F-101s, right? We can have multiple variants. For the US, for example, we can have two variants, the A and C models, which both use 20mm M39s. They use 4 of them. I think both of them use them, and it doesn't matter. Normally, just they have rockets and unguided stuff, even bombs apparently, and they would have a pretty good performance. They can get up to like Mach 1.7 or something, so they're pretty good interceptors. They climb very well. They're very nimble on the acceleration department, I would say, right? They're bigger aircraft, so I don't see them turning maybe too much, but they are very fast, and they have these guns, right? They do not have any missiles, apparently, these versions, so they wouldn't be too advanced, but there are upgrades to be able to use missiles and stuff like that. Mainly a Canadian one, which is the CF-101. That would be a little bit better, actually. So why is that? Well, because it doesn't have an internal gun, but it can actually use a gun pod, and then it can actually use the Falcon missile and even the Genie missile, right? So that would be a little bit more fun, I would say, for the Voodoo, because, of course, I think the 3 variants can be added, but the CF is just going to be more fun because it has the gun and it has the Falcons, right? So I don't understand why. I mean, it has a gun internally, not internally, but in a pod, right? A Vulcan, actually, so it's pretty good. But yeah, I don't understand why this thing didn't get added. The differences between them are very minor, I would say, in the performance, right? The main thing is the internal stuff. But of course, the C, for example, compared to the A is a little bit stronger, a little bit more structurally reinforced, right? And there are some other upgrades internally as well. So overall, of course, the C is a little bit better. In NDCF 101, which is basically the B model over here, also has some other things like, but yeah, generally they are the same vehicle, okay? Generally. Another Cold War interceptor that could be added that would be kind of cool. It doesn't bring anything too different to the table, but it is an interesting vehicle because it's unique enough that I think it deserves to be added. There's multiple variants out of it, so with minor changes over here and there, but overall, the actual CF-100, the good old Avro Canada Canuck, right? This is an interceptor made by Canada, right? The only, you know, like the main user was Canada, but the Belgians as well use them. But basically, this aircraft is a 50s vehicle, so it doesn't have a lot of performance, right? It's subsonic, doesn't have a lot of climb and stuff like that, but it can carry 850 cows, depending on the version, 420 millimeters. It can carry some rockets as well. It has kind of a basic radar as well. So, yeah, it could be an interesting vehicle. And, I mean, it could come for the US or the British as a Canadian vehicle, but it could come as well for the French Tech Tree as a Belgian, vehicle. So, yeah, nothing too crazy over here, guys, but it is a cool vehicle that got produced in large numbers. Around 692 of them were built. So, yeah, pretty cool vehicle. Like I said, subsonic. It probably turns very well because of the wings and stuff, but it doesn't have a lot of performance on the engines, right? But enough about the Americans and the Canadians, which are both of the main users of NATO side of things of interceptors, right? From the Cold War. Let's talk about the Soviets. The Soviets actually have two of them, and then some other honorable mentions later. The Su-11 would be the first one. Of course, the Su-9 could be added, but the Su-11 is the one that really is interesting because although it doesn't have an internal gun, it can carry gun pods, okay? So it can be added with gun pods. Normally, they would never use gun pods, but they did test the gun pods. It can go Mach 2, it's similar-ish to an Su-7, but with a delta wing design or something like that, right? So it's a little bit different. Very early radar, not a lot of range. It can carry the K-8 missiles, which are very early BVR missiles, technically BVR missiles that the Russians had. So nothing too crazy. We would feel like probably a bigger MiG-21, right? So yeah, very cool. It can carry the Grisha 23 pod in the wings, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe in the fuselage. I don't know, but yeah. And another one is of course the Su-15. The Su-15 is basically the evolution of this kind of line of thinking of Sukhoi, two-engined, right? Delta design. And it should be the TM version. So the Su-15, of course, can be added. With the TM version, it can carry R-60s, which would help an interceptor that doesn't have an internal gun again. And of course, this model is in particular, right? It is a little bit more maneuverable, and it can carry the gun pod. So, yeah, the missiles would be the R-98s, an evolution of the K-8, right? But in a general sense, these missiles aren't that good, but still, with the R-60s and stuff, it can do some stuff, and it would be a very fast vehicle. It has basically two MiG-21 engines, right? So it's a pretty fast aircraft that can do a lot of damage, and it should be added as a interceptor to the game. And of course, the last one of the main list before the honorable mentions, I gotta talk about the MiG-25. In this case, the PD, I already talked about this vehicle a lot, so I'm not gonna waste too much time, but yeah, 3,000 kilometers per hour maximum speed, 2.83 Mach, right? It can even go faster than this technically. It is very good in, climbing to the target, firing your missiles, and then getting back. It doesn't turn very well, obviously, but it just goes fast. In the PD model, of course, it would have countermeasures. It would have a radar and missiles that are based off of the technology used on the MiG-23 ML, right? So the same seeker kind of the R-24 is used on the R-40 RP, right? RD, sorry. And of course, the the improved IR version is there as well, and then the radar is using that technology to look down with MTI as well. So yeah, the MiG-25 PD could be added. It doesn't have a gun, but it's fast and it has some pretty good missiles. You can carry the R-60Ms as well, so it can be somewhat high BR, but it doesn't turn. So probably an event vehicle. It would be a very hard vehicle to fly, not for everybody, but it's still pretty interesting. And then some honorable mentions. Of course, the MiG-17 PF for the Soviets could be added. A MiG-31, yes, of course, the MiG-31 is one of the most iconic vehicles of the Cold War and after for the Soviets and Russians. But the thing is, it will already be added to the tech tree probably, so as an event or something like that. It's not really worth to actually mention in this video, because I think the MiG-31 is kind of already confirmed. It will come at a certain point. It's not confirmed by Gaijin, but on the terms of looking at the aircraft, it just makes sense that the aircraft would come. It's basically an evolution of the MiG-25, right? So it will probably be added anyway, right? So that's why I didn't mention too much of the 31, but it will probably be added, you know? So yeah, but of course, almost Mach 3 capable as well. PESA radar, first one to ever use that, uses the R-33s. Just an amazing, amazing vehicle. So yeah. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about, the Tu-128 as well, another Soviet interceptor that can be added. There is a particular version that has a 23mm gun that can be added. So I don't know. Not gonna waste too much time on this one, because honestly, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to be added. Why is that? Because it is pretty much the largest fighter ever in the whole world, the history and everything. It is just a vehicle that it's the size of a bomber. It's a Tupolev, I mean. And then it is an interceptor, used as an interceptor, right? So it's a very interesting vehicle. Very bad missiles, but for the time it was okay. And yeah, just an overall vehicle that was used by their air forces to intercept bombers. That's the idea, right? Since a bomber doesn't maneuver very well, you don't need to maneuver yourself as well. The objective was to have a little bit more long range as well and stuff. But anyway, I mean, uses the Bisnovat R4 missile, which are kind of bad, right? So I don't know how this could be added. It can be added. Let's wait and see, right? So these are it, guys. These are the interceptors that I think are realistic for us to actually expect to the game. I'm not saying that there isn't anything else, and I'm not saying that these will be added, but I think this is a very concise list. With the 106 being added, we can kind of have an idea that these ones that I talked about, they would have kind of a chance of being added, because they either have a gun or they would have good enough missiles and good enough performance to actually be added, especially as an event vehicle, most of them as an event vehicle, but also as a tech tree depending on situation, right? So yeah, guys, let me know in the comments what you think. A vehicle that I missed. Of course, there are way many, like Su-9s, there's the F-102 and many, many others. But the thing is, most of them will probably never get added, okay? Because of their performance, because of the lack of a gun, together with the performance. Anyway, this is it, okay? So I see you guys on the next one. Thank you all the patrons and members, and bye.